Good morning. Welcome to this first meeting of the Budget Committee, the 2014 Town Budget Committee. Committee members and council members, welcome. We are live on Town TV, so welcome to all the public as well. This morning's first order of business is the election of a budget chair. And committee, how do you wish to proceed? Councillor Elgar.
I would move Councillor Tom Adams to be budget chair.
All right, Councillor Adams, do you accept this nomination?
I would.
Are there other nominations? Well then, all those in favor of Councillor Adams? Opposed? Councillor Adams, congratulations. You have this duty again, and I propose we change seats at this time.
Okay, before we go any further, I want to note there are no regrets, and I want to make sure there are no declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any? See none. Very good. Further, any member of the public wishing to speak further regarding an issue on the 2014 Budget Committee agenda may appear before Council at its meeting on July 8th, 2013 at 7 p.m. when the recommendations from this meeting will go forward for final consideration. If you wish to speak as a delegation, please sign the sheet located at the back of the room or notify the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of the Council meeting, and any PowerPoint presentations must also be forwarded to the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of that meeting. Members of Council or Committee, we've got a number of items on the agenda today that we'll have presentations on, and we'll be coming back for consideration of how to deal with those items on July 4th. The first item is the 2014 Budget Directions and 2015 and 2016 Budget Forecast. And members of staff, you're going to be walking us through a number of the presentations, right? Sally, you're going to lead us off?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this represents the start of the 2014 budget process. The presentation today will provide an overview of both the operating budget and the 10-year capital forecast. Dominic Leonardo will then provide a presentation on community partnerships. I thought I'd begin my presentation with an overview of the 10-year financial forecast, as the impacts from this forecast will be seen in the 2014 to 2016 operating budget. The 10-year capital plan is more than a list of projects to be completed over the next 10 years. It sets the financial roadmap to achieve the town's strategic goals and is an important planning tool in determining future operating budget impacts, reserves, and debt levels. This slide shows the interconnection between the operating budget and the capital budget. The operating budget provides for the annual cost to deliver services and maintain infrastructure. The capital budget provides for investments in infrastructure or assets that provide long-term benefit to the municipality. The capital program presented today is fiscally sustainable and is in accordance with Council's strategic goals. A sustainable long-term plan ensures that flexibility is maintained over the long term, financial risk exposure is limited, the long-term cost of financing is minimized, statutory requirements are met, and credit rating criteria is considered. The plan was developed looking at the capital needs over time, ensuring both infrastructure renewal and new infrastructure is accommodated to the extent possible. Projects have been scheduled to ensure there are sufficient cash flows and that our reserves are maintained at appropriate levels. The town is only issuing minimal debt for the 10-year capital forecast. The 10-year capital budget includes a projection of the capital and operating needs to achieve Council's strategic priorities, the recommendations from master plans and infrastructure needs, both for renewal and growth, the impact of operating costs arising from new facilities, the town's debt levels and reserves, and future tax requirements have also been considered. The financial plan has been predicated on several policies and assumptions. It's important that we ensure that our debt repayment levels remain within Council's approved limits. The forecast assumes we will be issuing debt for the town's contribution to the new hospital. We've ensured that our total outstanding debt to reserve ratio will remain at 1-to-1 or better, as recommended by municipal credit rating agencies. This will help ensure the region's AAA credit rating is maintained. The forecast also assumes the 1% capital levy continues throughout the forecast, as it's an important source of funding in our 10-year capital plan and allows us to fund our infrastructure renewal requirements without issuing debt. The growth projects have been timed to reflect anticipated development and ensure that our reserve funds return to a positive position by the end of the 10-year plan. And funding for equipment and replacement reserves has been set at levels to adequately support life cycle replacement of our assets. We've divided the forecast into 5 components to prioritize projects against available funding sources. Our first component is infrastructure renewal. This is the cost to maintain our existing assets. Our growth projects are the projects that were identified in our development charge background study required because of population growth. Strategic priorities are initiatives to achieve Council's strategic plan, while community enhancements are improvements or enhancements that are not necessarily required because of growth, but have been identified by the community as desirable. And finally, our enterprise initiatives. Those are our ongoing projects to support the 3 self-supported businesses within the town: cemeteries, harbors, and parking. The draft capital forecast totals $867.6 million, of which $52.9 million is recommended in 2014. And as you can see, the highest spending is in infrastructure renewal, followed closely by our growth projects. This budget has been fully funded in the forecast. In the budget document that's being distributed today, there's also a list of projects that have been identified, totaling $24.6 million, which have not been funded at this time due to funding restraints. The slide shows the spending by category over the 10-year plan. As you can see, infrastructure renewal, that light blue color, or medium blue color, averages about $37.5 million per year. Our allocation for growth projects, the green color, is a little bit lower in the first couple of years and then picks up to about $40 million a year as we go forward. Strategic initiative spending is higher in the earlier years due to startup funding for our web-based initiatives and our EAB management plan. Our community enhancement projects have been slated primarily between 2017 and 2020 based on available funding and to allow time for preliminary work to be completed for the projects. Enterprise funding is fairly consistent throughout the years, with increased spending in the years where harbor dredges or seawall repairs are required. This chart's a little bit hard to read, but more information is in the budget document. This is our infrastructure renewal category, which is the highest component of the capital budget at $375.5 million. Slide highlights some of the highest value projects. The largest program within this category is road resurfacing and preservation at $88.8 million. This category also includes funding for replacement of vehicles and equipment. Infrastructure renewal projects have been aligned with the town's asset management plan to ensure our assets are maintained at optimal efficiency. Primary source of funding for infrastructure renewal is the capital levy, or our contribution from operating. This represents 50% of the total funding. Equipment reserves and building replacement reserves account for a further 30% of the funding, with the balance coming from the Parkland Reserve Fund, gas tax, and capital reserves. No debt has been required to fund our current infrastructure renewal needs. The growth component of the capital forecast accounts for $358 million over 10 years. The slide highlights some of our larger growth projects, including the Burloak Drive and Kerr Street grade separations, expansion buses, and neighborhood parks. Funding for our growth projects is primarily from development charges. The town's share required under legislation has been funded from the capital levy. Gas tax has been used to supplement development charges for our transit program. The legislated 10-year historical service level cap and mandatory discount significantly constrains our transit program. Funding of the transit program with a combination of the maximum allowable development charges and the use of gas tax reflects the strategy that was adopted in our development charge background study. External revenue shown on this chart result from project partnerships with other municipalities, MTO or CN, and represent their share of the project cost. This slide shows our projected development charge reserve funds. In the development charge background study and bylaw recently passed, we identified that the reserves are currently in a deficit position. This is a result of the slowdown in growth that's been experienced over the past few years. The growth capital program has been carefully aligned with anticipated growth and the resulting cash flows to ensure the reserve funds return to a balanced position by the end of the 10-year program. If development happens quicker than currently anticipated, the timing of these projects will be reviewed and potentially revised in future capital budgets. As I mentioned earlier, our strategic priorities include projects identified to meet Council's strategic goals. $54.4 million in projects have been identified, including our EAB management strategy, web-based services project, and the program to convert streetlights to LED. Funding for strategic priorities comes primarily from our capital levy, which represents 89% of the total funding for this component. Community enhancements include projects that improve or enhance the community, but are not entirely driven by growth. Timing of these projects has been carefully reviewed based on available funding, as well as the time it will take to get the project shovel-ready. The proposed timing ensures the town's reserves remain at levels required to adequately support the level of debt anticipated for the new hospital contribution. Our community enhancement projects have been primarily funded from the capital reserve at this time. It's anticipated that the surplus residual lands from the hospital and school sites will be sold and the proceeds used to replenish this reserve over time. And finally, our last component, enterprise reserves, is the smallest component of the forecast, totaling $17 million over the 10-year period. Funding for these projects comes from program-specific reserves and debt in the case of the harbor dredges. The debt charges will be fully repaid through harbor revenues in the future. Town sources fund the seawall repairs in accordance with our harbor business plan. This breaks down the capital forecast a little differently and shows it by the different program areas. As you can see, the largest program area over the 10 years is our infrastructure planning program, which accounts for about 45% of the total budget. The chart shows the funding for all components of the forecast. The capital levy or contribution from operating and development charges provide the largest source of funding at 64% over the 10 years. Other significant sources of funding include our capital reserves and equipment reserves at 14% and 9% respectively, and gas tax contributes about 8%. This chart shows us the debt charges that are anticipated on outstanding debt over the 10-year period. The debt charges assume that we will issue debt to an upset limit of $130 million for the new hospital. We've assumed a 3.5% interest rate on this debt, as that was the current 30-year rate at the time the forecast was prepared. Chart shows that our tax-supported debt and total debt charges are projected to be well within Council's guideline of 6.25% for tax-supported debt and 12% for overall debt. And I should also remind you that the provincial limit for debt is 25%, so we're well within those limits. This chart outlines the projected debt charges that we will pay over the 10-year period for the various sources of debt that's being issued. The financial plan has been carefully constructed to ensure the town's debt-to-reserve ratio is maintained at a ratio of 1-to-1 or better, as recommended by municipal debt rating agencies. And as you can see in this chart, we've maintained a 1-to-1 or better throughout the 10-year forecast. A little bit colorful here for the slide. When reviewing the long-term financial plan, it's important to consider the impact capital projects will have on our operating budget as we go forward. Operating impacts include the cost to staff facilities, drive buses, support the growth in the road and parks network. This chart shows the anticipated impact from projects identified in our 10-year capital plan. And as you can see, in 2014, we're currently anticipating about $3.1 million in operating impacts from the proposed capital projects. These operating costs will be reviewed as we go through the summer months and finalize our 2014 to 2016 budget, but you can see clearly the drivers of the operating impacts that we will be experiencing over the next few years. That concludes my overview of the capital plan. I now just want to spend a few minutes going over the 2014 to 2016 operating budget forecast. For the operating budget forecast, we've assumed a 1.5% general inflation on our materials, supplies, and purchase services, as many of our contract renewals are currently coming in at that range. Our fuel costs have been less volatile over the last few months. The 2013 budget, we assumed $1.10 per litre for fuel. To date, this year, we've been spending on average between $1.05 and $1.08 per litre. So at this time, we have not increased our fuel budget for 2014. Our insurance costs are expected to rise by 5% for 2013-14 based on the premium notice that we just received from our insurance carrier. Utilities have been increased 2.4% on hydro and 3.5% on gas and water. We will be reviewing our utility budgets over the summer months to ensure that they align with spending, as we have seen some savings in our quarterly progress reports as we've gone through the year. Our user fees at this time have been increased by 1.5% to ensure that we maintain our cost recovery ratios. All revenues will be reviewed during the budget process to ensure our user fees are maximized where possible. The town's rates and fee policy approved last year ensures that we review all of our rates and fees at least once every 4 years to ensure that they're maintaining the appropriate level of cost recovery. This year, as part of the 2014 budget, we will be reviewing our recreation fees, engineering construction fees, and fire fees to ensure that they conform to the policy. As well, our planning and development and building engineering fees for processing development applications have increased significantly in our 2014 forecast. This is based on increased development in both the infill and the greenfield, developments. The forecast assumes the regional allocation moves forward. Our personnel increases included in the budget are based on approved collective agreements for both transit and fire. Provision has been made for reasonable settlements for agreements that expired during 2013. The salary and wage budgets have also include the impact of step increases for employees moving through salary grids. Benefit costs are increasing based on the rate increases from the town's benefit carrier. As well, we've included an inflationary increase on our OMERS rates, and I should probably know there are several options before OMERS right now to review methods to reduce the increased contributions that are required to bring the fund to a funded position. The outcome of those discussions will probably be delivered to us sometime in July, and we will include that in our forecast as we move forward. The base budget continues to include gap positions in planning, building, and development engineering. At this time, we have 9.5 gapped positions built into the budget, as well as a provision corporately for gapping as the vacancy turnover happens throughout the year. The base budget provides only for the maintenance of existing services and does not include service enhancements or new initiatives. The one exception to this is the impact of completed capital projects. The budget includes all of the cost increases I previously talked about. It also assumes 0.75% in new assessment growth. At this time, based on the latest details we've got from MPACT, we're currently sitting at a negative growth position. That's due to all of the tax write-offs that have been received in the first half of this year. We are anticipating, though, with new subdivisions coming on in commercial building, that 0.75% is a reasonable expectation for growth for 2014. I mentioned the operating budget impacts from capital previously. This just shows you some of the highlights of what's driving the $3.1 million in operating impacts. It includes the firefighters for our new temporary Station 9, the impact of operating the North Operations Depot, new caravan drivers, as well as contributions to replacement reserves for new facilities and equipment. The capital forecast that I just presented this morning assumes the 1% capital levy continues throughout the period. The capital levy provides a significant source of funding in our forecast and allows us to fund our infrastructure renewal without issuing debt. The levy has been in place since 1996, and it's considered a municipal best practice. Many municipalities are now following suit and incorporating their own municipal levies. As well, an additional $250,000 has been included in the base budget for increased funding for road resurfacing as recommended during the 2010 budget. Based on all of the assumptions that I've outlined, the town's base budget increase is currently forecasted at 4.56%. This chart provides a high-level summary of the impact of the various components and is meant to supplement the program-based budgeting information that was found in the report in your agenda. The total increase for existing programs and services is 2.1%. That's the net base budget increase. Added to this is the operating impacts from capital and net of growth that brings our increase to 3.4%. When we add in the 1% capital levy and the increased funding for road resurfacing, it brings us to our total increase of 4.56% on the town's share of the tax bill. The Region of Halton will be presenting their 2014 budget forecast and report in early July. Their 2013 budget and business plan forecasted a 2.6% total increase, including police, for 2014. Based on this, and assuming no increase in education rates, the total tax impact, including the town's increase, is currently projected to be 2.76%. If the region were to come in at a lower amount at inflation, it would bring the total tax impact down to about 2.35%. We've also included for your information a forecast of our 2015 and 2016 projected increase. At this time, we're currently projecting our 2015 increase for the town portion, net of growth of 1% at 3.62 and 4.21 for 2016. When the region is added in there, our overall increase is projected for 2015 to be 2.43% and 2.63% for 2016. As part of the 2011 budget, Council gave us guidelines and directions for the preparation of the 2012 to 2014 budgets, namely that the staff be directed to prepare the 2012 to 2014 budgets with total property tax increases in line with inflation, and further that reduction options not accepted by the 2011 Budget Committee not be proposed by staff as potential reduction options during future budget preparations. Inflation has been fairly low over the past 2 years. The most recent StatsCan report for May showed CPI year over year at 0.7% and core CPI at 1.1%. While both total and core CPI are expected to remain subdued in the near future, they are projected to rise to about 2% by mid-2015. Given that it's expected to rise, and we're currently seeing inflationary increases on our contract renewals in the range of 1.5%, we have used this as our guideline for the budget forecast. The town's overall increase is currently projected to be 2.76%. To bring the increase in line with the budget guideline of inflation, we need to cap our increase at 1.5%. To meet this, the town's budget increase needs to be reduced to 1.35%, requiring reductions of about 3.2% on the budget, assuming the region of Halton's forecasted increase remains at 2.6%. This slide shows the dollar value of the reductions that would be required to achieve Council's guideline. Again, it assumes the region increase stays at 2.6%. Over the past several years, reductions totaling $6.8 million have been achieved through efficiencies and planned gapping. The CAO has committed to finding an additional $1.8 million in efficiencies, which were recognized in our 2013 budget. These efficiencies will be realized by 2015 and are to be achieved through streamlining processes rather than reducing service. To achieve the reductions above, which are in addition to the efficiency savings, staff will be looking at options to present to Council. They will likely require service level reductions. Again, we have been directed not to bring forward options previously presented to Council. As a result, a great deal of attention will be focused on options which will be presented to Council in November. The forecast presented today is the starting point for the staff budget preparation. During the next few months, staff will be reviewing their program budgets and preparing their submission for the Executive Management Team review. The CAO commitment to undertake the efficiency review is well underway. The savings identified to date will be included in the budget document released in November. As the savings are achieved, the tax stabilization funding will be reduced accordingly. Overall, by 2015, a total of $1.8 million in tax stabilization needs to be removed from the budget. And again, options will be developed in accordance with direction received to staff on reducing the overall increase. The meeting today, we've handed out the draft capital forecast. It is a draft at this time, and I've presented the overview of the operating budget. The meeting will be adjourned until July 4th to give you time to review the information presented today. And the July 4th meeting has been scheduled for direction to staff on the budget preparation. We'll then go away and prepare the budget documents. At this time, the staff recommended budget is planned to be presented to Council on November 2013 with an approval targeted of December 9th, 2013. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Other questions at this time? Councillor Elgar?
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's appreciated. In our package, there was one chart which I found very helpful, and it's the one that's a summary of the forecasted increases of all town programs,
Okay, let me just get
where you've got 2013, 2014. What I would ask if the Budget Committee at least could have, is if we could actually have added to that the actuals for 2010, 2011, and 2013 for the total dollars, and then also split out the salary and benefit portion as it's broken down, and the contracted or purchase services portion, and also the full-time equivalent head count, the FTEs, so that so we're apples to apples. I think that would help, give an analysis of make sure that the numbers look reasonable to everybody on the committee.
Sure.
I would appreciate that. If that's
we can
not
do that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good starting point to help us out, and then we can go from there. But I would appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
So that's the 2010, 2011, 2012.
Actuals.
And the actuals. And did you say you wanted the 2013 forecast
Yes. Yes.
for to go along
For
with it?
broken out by
Actuals plus forecast.
actuals by the salaries and total, which we have.
Yeah.
And the salaries and benefits portion and the contracted or purchase services portion, and the full-time equivalents, FTEs.
Okay. Salary plus benefit and the other. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Any other questions? Councillor Lapworth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nancy, for the presentation. At some point in this process, can we get a schedule that will tell us all of the uncontrollable costs, 14/13, related to collective agreements, operating expenses connected to capital projects that were created last year
Sure.
for a grand total?
Certainly, we can do that.
Thank you.
Any others? Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, through you to Nancy and to Chris Mark as well. For the past number of months, Councillor Johnson and I have been working on a couple of relatively small capital projects in Lakeshore Woods. One goes back to about 6 months ago when the mayor spoke to a bunch of students at Morden School, and they were extremely impressed with his presentation. And one young fellow then wrote to us and asked for a basketball court in Nautical Park. That's point one. And incidentally, Mr. Mark has petitioned by mail the adjacent residents to the potential site, and there didn't seem to be any significant opposition. And the other, Nancy, as we discussed, was for several years now, we've been working with some residents in Lakeshore Woods about 2 or 3 tennis courts behind the dog run. And that has worked itself right into the Parks, Recreation, and Library, I think it's called, master plan. Mm-hmm. What I'm asking is, where do these two small capital projects stand now, bearing in mind that there's nothing like this in Lakeshore Woods because we have no schools there?
Okay. The Shell Park tennis courts are currently included in the capital forecast as funded in 2015. The basketball court right now is in the list of projects that are currently unfunded.
Well, when you say unfunded, I guess everything is unfunded at the moment.
What we've done, it's all draft, it's preliminary. What staff has done is prioritize projects in those different categories, and we have funded them to the extent possible. We used their funding envelope and funded all of the projects. What was left over were projects that were enhancements to the community, but at this time we didn't have the funding. So it is draft. It doesn't mean that council can't tell us to fund that and swap it with something else, but at this time it's currently sitting as unfunded.
Do we have detail in here, which I haven't read yet,
You do.
showing what
Yes.
these two items cost?
Yes, the one is.
Because that, I haven't even
we
looked.
do.
I haven't even looked at.
Okay, the tennis courts are 350,000 and the basketball court is 50,000.
50,000 for
50,
the basketball. Okay, thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Elgar, you had a further question?
Just on the capital portion, the development charges which are negative. So how are we paying for the items now? We are borrowing the money to pay for what we have to do for the development?
Right now, that's the total uncommitted balance. Development charges through PSAB are considered deferred revenue. So you only transfer the money into a project as you spend it. So that's our total uncommitted balance. Every project we've approved that's funded from development charges, if we spent it all today, that would be our balance. But the projects take time to be funded. So currently, not all the money is in the projects. As we go forward and spend it, we move it in. If we had to borrow that money because we couldn't carry it, we would charge interest to the development charge fund.
That actually was where I was going with that question, so I appreciate that. And that is part of our development charge, that we do charge the interest.
Yes, we do, yes.
So overall, how much are we subsidizing development on a dollar value?
Well, in the 10-year plan, let me just find the slide here. Sorry. Just see if I can find the. So this is our growth funding. We've got 76% of the program is funded from development charges. The 10% around there is what we're legislated to contribute to our soft services. So every project in transit, parks, recreation, etc., we have to contribute 10% to that. We have some external funding because there are some projects that have got partnerships, and then we've used gas tax to subsidize our transit program.
And that's and that's why the gas tax, we are subsidizing the growth with our gas tax, not for just our ongoing infrastructure.
For gas tax, you can only use it to expand your transit, so it's for expansion of our transit program.
So that it's in the right spot.
It
so
is.
10% of so for 2014, how much? What is that in dollars? And 13, what is that? Like, I'm just thinking, you don't need it right now. Sorry, Nat.
I'll have
But
to
I
get
think
it
it'd be
for
good
you.
so that
Sure.
we know how big is this number that we are subsidizing at this point. I appreciate that for the years.
We'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the forecast? Okay. Oh, Councillor Giddings, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Question in terms of on page 15 of the report, it talks about funding constraints for the South Central Community Centre, Oakville area, arena reconstruction and so on. As the proposed South Central Rec Centre will be pretty well fully funded through the sale of the surplus properties from the three schools, I see that the demolition will occur 16-17. So the second half of the forecast, are we looking at possible construction start 2018? Is that what the second half refers to?
I believe so. Let me just find my notes here. Sorry, 1 second. So right now, we're anticipating getting the hospital site in 2016. Studies would need to be undertaken, and then the demolition would take place between 2016 and 18. We're then expecting, there's further studies, a whole lot of studies that need to be done. Those are all scheduled in 2016. And then design and construction would start in 2017 with completion in 2021 at this time.
Thank you. So is it possible to have design work being done concurrently with the demolition? And second question to that, is there revenue built into that for a fitness facility in the proposed South Central Rec Centre?
The fitness facility, I'll have to defer to Nina DeVal. Right now, we could do the design at the same time. The problem is the funding. We've been very careful in this forecast to ensure that our reserve balances are maintained so that we keep our debt to reserve ratio at 1-to-1. It's really important as we go out to issue debt for the hospital. Regardless of the funding source of the debt repayment, it still counts in our overall debt. So we want to maintain our reserves at the level we need when we issue the debt, which is why the timing of this project is when it is. To move it forward, we'd have to look at what that means to the overall forecast, and something else would likely have to be moved out.
I appreciate that, and we would also consider that a large part of it may well be self-funded through the sale of the lots that would assist keeping that current.
It would, but typically the sale of the lots happens a little bit later on in the process. It takes a while to sell those lots. So when we're preparing the forecast, we're not counting on the revenue from the sale right up front because we know it's going to take time to work through that process. So we've currently funded it from reserves and then anticipate that when the lots are sold, that money will go back into those reserves.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, then members of the committee, at this point, what we'll do is receive the two reports under items 2 and 3. We'll come back and provide guidance to staff on July 4th. Could I get a motion to receive those? Councillor Lapworth, all those in favor? That's carried, thank you. Item number 4 is the Community Partnership Projects Update. Commissioner Leonardo, are you going to walk us through this package?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to have a few slides to highlight the activities that staff have been undergoing over the last 2 years associated with the community partnership projects. So today is just a little bit of an update. I want to thank Chris Mark and Nina DeVal for their assistance in dealing with the community groups. We've had a number of meetings over the last year and a half. I also want to acknowledge and thank the sports groups and the various groups who we've had communications with. They have been advised that today is a day when the committee receives the report. They may be in attendance on July 4th if they have any questions or may want to bring any additional information forward. I do want to acknowledge that the representatives of the YMCA are here today, but at this point they, like the other clubs, if there are any questions, probably best defer to July 4th meeting. Now, Mr. Chairman, just by way of background, you recall that there were a number of requests that came through Council in 2011 with respect to the partnering with the town. As you know, we've had some very successful partnerships with the town, the gymnastics facility, the indoor soccer facility, and as small as a small clubhouse with the Little League. Those have proven to be quite successful, and we're particularly proud that those are moving forward well and providing the enhanced services for both indoor and outdoor recreation to our citizens. So based on those requests in 2012, Council did refer all of those requests to the 10-year capital forecast, and over the last year or so we've been having discussions with the various clubs and organizations to understand the scope of those requests that they're coming forward, and I'm here today to provide you with that update. So today is about providing you with information. We're not recommending any of these projects to move forward just yet. It is about trying to understand the scope and the risks and the cost implications of all of these partnerships, and then we'll be coming forward later on with a report later on in the fall, which will help Council decide which partnerships they wish to proceed. So any feedback over today and July the 4th will be taken into account as we go forward with these proposals. Just for information, I think most of you know that we have been in discussions with these 6 particular groups. They do vary in terms of scope. Everything from our discussions with the YMCA have been focusing primarily on what the operating model might look like, to the aquatics and the 50-meter pool, which we have developed a more detailed business plan, which is part of your agenda today. Discussions with gymnastics and the Oakville Soccer Club have been much more at a higher level, and with the curling club, of course, we've had some more detailed discussions, and I have a bit of an update on them as well. So let me spend a few minutes on each of those proposals. The first one is with the YMCA. And at this point, discussions with the Y have been focusing on the development of a single community center for the new communities north of Oakville. We're not looking to build a YMCA plus a community center north of Dundas. We're looking for one single community center that will be in partnership with the Y. In terms of the 10-year forecast, only design fees have been identified in the latter half of the 10-year forecast. So at this point, there are no funds attached in the 10-year forecast for this project. And discussions, as I said, have primarily focused on objectives, principles, operating models. We've looked at a number of other municipalities. They vary as well. Niagara Falls, for example, and Hamilton each have partnerships with YMCA. But at the end of the day, Mr. Chairman, we're looking to explore what is the financial capacity of the YMCA to work with us so that they can bring capital and operating dollars to minimize tax dollars to the town and perhaps bring the project forward earlier than currently planned. Now, Mr. Chairman, you heard me talk about the partnership with the Y, and you heard that other municipalities have similar partnerships. And the services that the Y and the town provide are not unsimilar. In fact, we provide similar kinds of services. What's different is that the Y has a different operating model. They have a membership model where you pay a yearly fee and you have access to the facility, whereas the town has a registration or program model where you register for specific programs and services and you use our facilities for each of those. But there are variations in those models that we've explored with other municipalities. We will continue to do so, and subject to discussions with council over the next few months, we'll be able to finalize and make some recommendations about that partnership. But at the end of the day, it is a recreation facility for the residents of Oakville. We've also been in discussions with the Oakville Aquatics Club for a 50-meter pool. Their wish, and as you can see by the attachment in the report, there is a draft business plan. A consultant was hired on behalf of both the town and the YMCA. Sorry, not the YMCA, the Aquatics Club. The assumptions in that proposal or in that business plan are directly linked to the needs and the assumptions that the Aquatic Club has brought to the table. Their primary interest is to have a 50-meter pool with 1,200 seats and an additional 25-meter pool as well. So they're looking at the facility of that size. We believe that that's in the cost range of about $45 million with an operating impact of somewhere between $1.7 and $2.6 million. Now, we're giving you a range at this point because these are still draft information and still discussions with them. We also had a bit of a review on what would happen if we didn't have seating, in other words, 4 walls, a tank, and a roof, perhaps similar to the soccer facility. That facility comes in at just under $30 million, slightly less in operating cost. We then also looked at a model of a pre-engineered structure, which would have some capital savings, but the operating cost would be similar to option 2. Now, Mr. Chairman, those are still very preliminary, and as you can see by the recommendation of the staff, we're suggesting that we continue to have discussions with the 50-meter pool folks to look at alternative options for elite training. Those would include not looking at a 1,200-seat facility, but that doesn't preclude us from bringing forward the information on the 1,200-seat facility. At this point, there is no funding in the 10-year capital forecast shown for a 50-meter pool. And I will advise that the Oakville Aquatics Club have advised staff that they do not have the capacity to do fundraising for capital contributions. So in other words, it's not like the gymnastics facility where they're prepared to pay back based on a loan, nor are they prepared to take on any operating risks in the event that they are the operators and revenues get a shortfall. So those are just very preliminary at this point, but they understand what those risks are at this time. Just to give you a sense of what a 50-meter pool looks like, you've heard lots of discussions in the Greater Toronto area about the Pan Am Games. A number of facilities are being built across the GTA and the Hamilton area. And essentially it's a 50-meter pool with a, in between it usually gets divided to 2 25-meter pools for swimming. Typically those pools are only about 7 feet deep and are not normally good for the kinds of programs the municipality likes to run in terms of aquatics programs. The water obviously is a lot cooler at a 50-meter pool for the competitors. Now, as you know, we have an agreement with the gymnastics facility at Glen Abbey. Their program is extremely successful. They are looking to expand their program and have asked the town to look at a similar facility as part of the North Park development. We anticipate at this point that the estimated capital cost is $10 million. This is not included in the 10-year forecast as well, but they are prepared to look at, subject to finalizing what that capital number is, what the loan repayment schedule might be, similar to what we have at Glen Abbey. So they're looking for an extension of the current arrangement that they have at Glen Abbey. We would obviously have to do a much more detailed business plan and review their financials to understand their capacity to take on additional work. But at this point, the model that they're moving forward with is similar to what we have at Glen Abbey. One of our other successful partnerships is with the Oakville Soccer Club, 12,000 strong at Pine Glen, an indoor soccer facility. They're experiencing growth in indoor. In fact, most of the GTA is experiencing growth in indoor soccer, so it's becoming a 12-month program. Their request is for the town to complete North Park, but in the completion of North Park, they're looking to put up 2 air-supported bubbles or structures for winter use. They are not looking at this point at a permanent structure until they get a better sense of where they might want to go with additional indoor facilities. $500,000 has been included in the latter half of the 10-year forecast to start some of the parks development at North Park, but at this point, no other funding has been included in the budget for this project. We're estimating that the cost for the request and the completion of parts of North Park would be in the $12 to $13 million range. And again, their commitment would be that they would pay back approximately $7 million of that $12 million, similar to what they're doing at Pine Glen. Again, like the Oakville Gymnastics Club, we would have to look at their finances and business models to make sure that they have the capacity to take on additional payback of that loan. I do want to emphasize that they are looking at a bubble structure at North Park. I think you know what they look like. This is what they generally look like. So I think you need to understand the implications of what the ask is. And obviously those bubbles would come down during the summer months. Now you also will recall that in 2011 we were asked by staff through formal resolution to have discussions with the Oakville Cricket Club for the expansion of, we didn't, getting confused with the Cricket Club and the Curling Club. This is cricket. They're requesting a regulation cricket field in Oakville. Currently they operate under a field at Glen Ashton Park, which is not regulation. It's about the size of a soccer field, and the cricket pitch, and I'll have pictures of this, is actually right in the middle of the soccer field. You really cannot use the soccer field and the cricket pitch for the same use, and I'll show you a slide later on why that is. Now, in discussions with them and the mayor and some members of council, we did make improvements to their facility in 2012 by spending about $60,000, and there have been certainly significant improvements there. But we are looking at locations for a temporary regulation field, whether that be at North Park or some additional lands that we own on the south side of Lower Base Line. There is $350,000 at this time identified in the 2015 budget for a temporary cricket pitch. Now, there's been some questions raised about why can't that cricket pitch be located in the middle of a soccer field or a baseball diamond. And I want to give you an illustration that generally a cricket pitch is about the size of 2 senior soccer fields. It's about anywhere between 120 to 200 meters in diameter. That outer rim does vary in terms of size and shape, but there is an internal infield with a pitch. Now, when we overlap that with 2 senior soccer fields, you'll see how that generally works out. So we could do a multi-purpose field, but that actual pitch should be located not within the actual playing area of the soccer pitches or the baseball diamonds. And the reason for that is you can see that the pitches, where the wickets are, really are different materials. And if you look closely, especially at the picture on the top right, you will see there is a lip, and there's also what I'll call the equivalent of golf divots, which do create a problem for soccer. And the not unevenness, but the change in material does create a safety problem. The various materials used for the cricket pitch include just hard-packed clay, Artificial turf is becoming more and more popular because of the maintenance of it. Simple granular materials at the bottom right and at the bottom left. And I throw this slide in because just to give you a sense of the enormous size of a regulation cricket pitch. And as you can see, they do vary where the pitch is actually located, where that bowling pitch is, but the actual field is significantly large and approximately the size of 2 senior soccer fields. So my last one is the Oakville Curling Club. This, we did get formal resolution from council to have formal discussions with them. They were looking to expand their existing facility from 8 sheets of ice to 12. The capital cost was approximately $4 million. The ask was land as well as a $2 million loan, which they would repay $2 million of it, but an additional $2 million they were seeking as a contribution to the capital of that cost without having to repay. No funds have been included for this project, and in fact, late last year, when we reviewed their business plan, they wrote us a letter suggesting at this point that they would like to withdraw the request for a partnership at this time. Now, my last few slides, Mr. Chairman, is just to look at the impact of where are these things going to all fit. And we've been talking about primarily North Park. So as part of reviewing the partnership programs, we are looking at revising the North Park Master Plan, primarily because of looking at where the future high school will go. As you know, there's a designation for a high school right at the corner of Neagawa and Dundas, and we are working with the school board to see how we can come up with a revised master plan that incorporates the high school as well. In other words, looking at this facility, looking at the site as a joint public site. So the purpose of that study is really to test the capacity of North Park to take on some of these capital projects or these partnership projects. And we will be bringing forward a proposal later on in the year on the impacts of those requests. Just to give you a sense of what North Park, the current master plan looks like, the high school ends, as you can see, are at the corner of Neagawa and Dundas. Subject to acquiring those and making a decision that they in fact do want to acquire them. Right now they're in private ownership. And then the rest of the site is our park. You can see where the quad pad facility is, and we've built 2 senior soccer fields at this point, and the rest of the site remains undeveloped, and the north depot is at the north end of the site, which will be developed shortly. This sort of gives you a photograph or a picture of what we have currently developed in the site and where there might be opportunities where we can work closely with the school boards and potentially our community partners in locating some of those facilities. So in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, we are moving forward and asking you to allow us to continue discussions with all of the groups, and we're actually asking for formal approval to have discussions with the YMCA. I want to emphasize that all of the partnership groups clearly understand that in approving or in giving us approval to have the discussions, that none of these projects should be seen as having a final approval. They all understand that clearly. We will continue to have discussions with the Oakville Gymnastics Club and Soccer Club, as well as the Aquatics Club, and exploring some other alternatives for a 50-meter pool or other facilities for them. These all need to be tied together at the end of the day with a test of what is the capacity of North Park, and as we come forward later on in the fall, we'll have that report prepared for you, and so that you have a clear understanding what those opportunities and constraints might be. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation on the partnership projects today.
Okay, thank you very much. And before going further, I'll just declare that my family is a member of the Oakville Gymnastics Club and the Oakville Soccer Club. Not that that's a pecuniary interest, but I thought I'd declare it. Mayor Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I wonder if staff could, as they proceed, have at least one discussion with the Burloak Canoe Club about their possible interest in a paddle tank.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor?
A paddle tank.
Paddle tank?
Which I understand to be a relatively small item that I would hope we might be able to find a synergistic way to incorporate into something else. And I know that that's a long-standing concern of that club.
Any others on this issue? Councillor Elgar?
Thank you, Mr. Leonardo, for the presentation. I guess what I'm wondering is there a way we can give assistance from development charges and put this into some of the portion of lots of this into the development charges? I'm thinking like expansion of the YMCA or a community center is because of growth. Is there any way we can put that in there where it properly belongs? Because what you're asking for a lot has to do with growth that is happening and where these demands are coming from.
Mr. Chairman, the development of North Park, the community center, is all development charges. So that's clearly a growth-related project. The timing of that is not till the latter half of the 10-year forecast. If there's an opportunity for the Y to bring additional funds and we use less of or augment, depends on the model that we have, there should not be an impact on the tax dollars. So on the community center component, clearly it's an opportunity, I believe, in development charges subject to financing. On the pool side, the town has the ability to decide what facilities they want to build. But as you can see in our report, we're recommending that if you're going to build a 50-meter pool, that would not be instead of a 25-meter pool in the north. So it would be in addition to. And you'd have to weigh, again, looking at your capital forecast and the development charges, where you want to move monies to move that around. It's not, the 50-meter pool was not recommended in our master plan, so I think we need to look at report back on opportunities for funding for those, and that's the intent later on in the fall. I think that pretty well covers off. I think the rest of the stuff are in there.
I'm thinking the gymnastics also, though, which is, the only reason you would need another facility for gymnastics would be due to the fact of the rapid growth.
I'd have to look into that, Mr. Chairman, and report back both on the gymnastic and the soccer component to it as well.
Okay, I've got Councillor Lockworth and Mayor Burton and Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Leonardo, thank you so much. I find all these projects very exciting for the youth of our town, and it's all going to contribute to making Oakville the most livable town in Canada. But I have a question on the Oakville Soccer Club. It says here, operating agreement loan repayment similar to that at Pine Glen Indoor Soccer Center, but you're asking for a split of 5.5 million town and 7 million Oakville Soccer Club. Is that not the arrangement right now?
The current arrangement at Pine Glen is, I believe it's $9 million was the initial capital that they repaid, and there was about $1 million the town contributed. They're two different projects. The difference in the split is not because you can't compare the two. What I was trying to say is that they're prepared to repay their portion of the $12 million that would cost to get that project completed at North Park in the same way as Pine Glen. So they were prepared to repay that. They wanted a loan. And what we're saying in the report, that the amount that they would repay is approximately $7 million. The rest of town is scheduled to build as part of DC's and the completion of North Park, but again, in the future and beyond the 10-year forecast.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mayor Burton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I wonder if staff could provide us at a future meeting a breakout of how much we might be relying over the next 10 years on monies derived from parkland dedication charges.
We will do that.
Thank you.
The reason I ask that is I've heard that the organization known as BUILD, which represents developers, is lobbying the provincial government to remove our parkland dedication fees from our fiscal tools. And I need to be able to show what a disaster that would be for a growing community. Thank you.
So that's the value of the land, whichever way it's contributed.
Yeah, what kind of a hole in our finances would?
It would be a ginormous hole.
So
Yeah.
I just want the numbers, so that we can.
Yeah.
And then I'm asking other mayors of other growth communities to do the same exercise, because I'm worried that the province hasn't been given perhaps as accurate a description of this source of money as they need.
Thank you for bringing that to everybody's attention. Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Leonardo, were you aware that the Halton Multicultural Council has expressed an interest in some form of a partnership relationship with the Y, and that the Y has expressed an interest in that as well? Were you aware of that interaction? And if you weren't, I'm mentioning to you now because it's something you might want to keep in mind when you start the talks.
Mr. Chairman, personally, I was not, but we certainly will follow up with the Y and find out.
Thanks.
Councillor Robinson, were they looking for working with the Y on a new centre?
Yes,
That's the...
As Mr. Leonardo knows, the Halton Multicultural Council met with him a couple of years ago to try and find a space to create a facility. That isn't going to happen. It's too much money and there isn't the land. So now I've talked with both groups, not about this, but it came up during other conversations, particularly with the Y, and they're interested in talking about HMC becoming part of the new facility that the Y may be building.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Anybody else have questions on this particular item? Okay. Then I just want to make sure, are there any members of the audience today here, members of the public, who'd like to bring some information to the committee today as opposed to on July 4th? Either on this item or the previous items dealing with the forecast? Going once, going twice, sold? Okay. Then could I have a motion to receive the report regarding the Community Partnership Projects update? Councillor Lapworth, I think you moved it. Well, we'll give direction on the 4th. We're going to recess and come back and do those things in their entirety. Mayor Burton?
Mr. Chair, the presentation by Mr. Leonardo included a statement that they were actually looking to us to pass the recommendation in the report here, on the agenda here. Would you like to ask him to clarify what they want?
Are you looking for that today, or are you looking for that on the 4th? I know you're eventually looking for that.
You're right, Mr. Chairman. Eventually, the 4th is fine, and if you wish to add the comments from Mayor Burton, you can, but we've also taken notes, so we will follow up on the direction that suggested by the committee, whichever way you follow. But I don't need it today. By the 4th would be good.
Mayor Burton, are you content with going to the 4th, or do you wish to deal with it immediately? Councillor Lapworth has given us a motion to receive the report, but if you wish to deal with it immediately, then let me know. If you if you wait, then we have the opportunity to think about whether we want to add anybody else or anything like that.
So on the understanding that we'll get a revision to incorporate then I would support the receipt.
Then all those in favor of receiving for today? That's carried. Okay, members of committee, we've dealt with the receiving the reports and the information. What we're going to do is not adjourn, but rather recess until Thursday, July 4th at 9:30, at which time we'll deal with providing staff direction on the budget directions and forecasts, both the operating side and the capital, as well as the community partnership projects update. So, Councillor Lapworth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one more request, please, if I may, of the Deputy Treasurer.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The Oakville Hydro Board has been very, very busy of late, and I was wondering if we could get an update of their projection for 2014 by July 4th.
Could you please clarify that? What is it you would like?
We had some numbers from Oakville Hydro recently, but I just wanted to know if we have an update for their 2014 projection.
If you're asking about what are the projections for the hydro dividend for 2014, we can certainly give you that.
That's fine, thank you.
Any other information that's requested? If there's anything in your, as you're reviewing the documents that have been provided today, if there's further questions, then please provide them in advance to Nancy and/or myself so that we can provide the information by the 4th so that we can make a informed decision. Okay? Thank you very much, everybody. We're recessed, and we'll see you next week.